another draft. This time we are drafting set one, so a little bit different. I don't have a ton of knowledge on the set. When we got into this game, it was pretty deep into the set, so I think I'd only had drafted this maybe 6 or 7 times throughout its entirety, and this is probably like the eighth or ninth time I've drafted it now, if we're including times after set two. So we're in Bothell at Zulu's games, and they're just doing a throwback draft. They'd acquired some extra product, and now they're doing a throwback draft. The person in front of me is sitting three to my left, and they open a Boba Fett, and I open a Boba Fett, so I'm not too worried about having Boba be cut. Um, we open Hera, Jin, and Boba, and I have them in order bottom to top and of their strength. I think Boba's far and beyond the highest floor. He's similar to Cad Bane, where I don't think he's actually the best deck, but I think he's the highest floor, and he has an even higher floor than Cad Bane. Him coming down on five and getting you back mana is just too strong. Jin's incredibly strong as a leader, especially with how aggressive Heroic is, but you pretty much have to take Boba if Boba's open, and I think the only other Boba drafter is the one three to my left. I look two to my right, I don't see a Boba. Here we see Jin and Grand Marth. If I know I'm going to play Boba, I think it's actually correct to take Grand Moff just so that I can cut Villainous, but that's a little too crazy. So I end up taking Jin, which I'm very happy with. I think she's the best, or excuse me, the highest floor heroic leader. And then lastly, Sabine, who is Creighton constructed, but is pretty mediocre in draft. I think with Sabine, what's carrying her is the red and green cards. The actual leader herself is pretty whatever. The person two to my right is all villainous, which is a little concerning, but I think Boba is honestly strong enough that it shouldn't be the end of the world. Here is some interesting things to think about when we're starting is I think the three resource, three in a red, three, four in heroic is probably the strongest card, and it goes into Sabine and Jin. So part of me really wants to take that. The thing is I just really want to be Boba. So now I'm sitting here thinking, am I going to force the villainous? It's not even force. Am I going to take just like villainous cards over this very good three drop that's very aggressive that can go in either of my heroic leaders? Or do I just take Boba, which means I'm probably taking like Swoop Racer or Cell Block Guard. The thing to note in this set is that a 3 resource 4/3 in ground is pretty strong. It's not like set 2 where that's common, it's pretty uncommon. Swoop Racer is one of the higher setted limited cards in the format. I think I'm waffling between just taking a straight villainous card and then a good yellow card. They both slot into Boba Fett. The thing is like, if I take the 3 resource 4/3, if it can easily find its way into Jyn Erso, or excuse me, into Sabine, and will 100% find its way into Jyn Erso. So now I'm just taking a look around the table. I don't actually move my camera, I'm looking at the leaders and thinking about what's around me. And I think ultimately we end up on Subblock Guard. I think I want to be Boba, and I just value Sentinel so high in a deck like Boba. Being able to control the ground is just so important because you're just basically never leaving away. Boba is just so incredibly strong, and I think he really is strong as control. Like here, I snap off a resupply. Resupply is one of the best cards that you can get with Boba Fett. It actually might be the best Boba Fett card that isn't overwhelming barrage. The reason being is having Boba come out a turn earlier is just so backbreaking. 11 stats for 5 resources is just too strong. Now we end up in like a weird spot where we're seeing a couple of different resources, or excuse me, a couple of different colors that we want to be. Like the Death Trooper is very strong, but ultimately I think Syndicate Lackeys is just too good. Ambush is just so strong. It just helps you control the board. I typically don't like taking the higher drop stuff early because I think there's kind of a glut of it in this set. So that's a little bit slower, and I think there's a lot better of higher cards, but 5 resource, 5 force is still strong. Yeah. Here's another one where we're seeing a bunch of different strong cards. We're seeing Open Fire, which is strong, Admiral Piet, which is extremely strong, and likely if we're gonna be playing Boba, we want to be yellow green. But I think it's just Syndicate Lackeys. The card's just too good. Okay. Here, if we're going to be green, if we're committing to green like we had with the last couple picks, I think, or with resupply, I think it's just an easy 97th Legion. This card is probably the best 7 drop in the uncommon slot, uncommon slot. It's just so strong and so backbreaking late game. It also contests against all the walkers because it scales with them. So, no good to me. Dad is very strong, but at the end of the day, I still think the 7 drop is just too good. This pack is kind of a brick, but take a quick look to see if we have any vehicles so we can take the walker. But ultimately, I think it's either that or surprise strike. But even without any vehicles, I think the 4 resource 3/5 is just fine stats wise, and it's so strong if it's turned on with and given ambush, and that's something that we can sort of draft around later. Here we see a Battlefield Marine, which is just heartbreaking. That card is so strong. We probably could have had like a green yellow heroic deck, but it seems like green yellow villainous is also open, so not the end of the world. I think the pick between Admiral Piat and Maximum Firepower, and while Maximum Power we have to draft around, I think removal is just so difficult, and the issue with Admiral Piat is you have to signal that you're going to be doing that, and I don't think our deck really needs it considering we have 2 ambush on 5, so I just end up with a build around card. Here's where we start valuing low resource units higher than powerful stuff. Like we have 2 5s and a 7 and a 4, so I think we just want to take the Imperial 2 drop it. A 2 resource 3/2 is also, in my opinion, very strong, and because it has upside, while a lot of 2 resource units have 3 power, this one I think is particularly good because it also has an ETB trigger. It's also Imperial for the 4 drop removal spell, maximum firepower. So the deck is shaping up pretty good as long as green yellow continues to be open because we are pretty committed to both colors now between the resupply 97 legions and the 2 lackeys. Also starting to think between resupply and 97th Legion that the person to the right of me isn't yellow or isn't green, but I think they actually end up being green. Here, I think while Blizzard ATST is super strong, we just need 3, 2, and 3 drops. Like, we just need to survive the early game, deploy an early Boba, be able to trade, and then we can pretty much run away with the game. Again, here's another spot where, like, I think Surprise Strike is probably just a stronger card than the 2 resource 2/2 with the shield. But we've seen a lot of Surprise Strikes, so in my mind, I'm thinking one's going to wheel right now. So I just take the 2 resource 2/2, and there we go. Next one is Surprise Strike. Perfect. Exactly what this deck wants, and it's extremely good with the shielded unit because it can trade up and still live. Turns your 2 for 1 into a 1 for 1. think there's a couple of new drafters in this pod, so it's going typically a little slower than typical, but that's okay. It's always good to have new players in the game. Here's an easy another Frontier ATRT. I think the three resource exhaust everything in a space is just kind of a trap. It's just so hard to make work. I don't think it's the kind of tempo card that we want to be playing. And also the ATRTs turn on other ATRTs, which is not nothing. Not much of a pick. Neither of these cards are of any consequence. I just take the heroic because they're both unplayable in our deck, and that's just one less card our opponent could use, was hypothetically heroic to our left, but it's inconsequential. These kinds of picks don't really matter. I'm just pretty committed to yellow green, so I might as well hate draft. Hate drafting in general is just a generally bad idea. It's not something you want to be doing. You're taking away one of your own picks or a sideboard pick to deny someone a hypothetical card that you're going to play against, but not only would you have to get paired against them, and you'd have to play against them, and they'd have to draw it. Like, it's just so unlikely. You basically should only be hate drafting if there's actual zero. Like, you should take sideboard cards before hate drafting. It means so little to your draft and adds such little percentage, and a lot of times it might just actually be zero. All right. Pack 2. Academy training is fine. I'm extremely high on the Snowtrooper Lieutenant. And not much else here. This is just a snap, a Snowtrooper Lieutenant. It's a 2-drop. And even as something that's not going to be contesting other 2 and 3-drop units, I think with maximum firepower, we want to be going Imperial. And this card is just so strong. And just like giving you back part of your action economy. And I also want to be drafting Imperials, so it is worth noting that it is something that I could potentially play this plus maximum firepower to play 2 spells in 1 turn, and one of them being an Imperial to help add the extra 2 damage. Also, the +2/+0 is very strong. Okay. Not a ton in this pack. I think I end up waffling between the Star Viper and the Fallen Lightsaber, but I think, what I end up looking at now is seeing, do I have any Force units in my deck? And I think the answer is no. But even still, Wes is always harping about this, that really should be looking, is your leader a Force unit? So it takes me a while, but I don't think Fallen Lightsaber is going to slot itself onto like 5 resource +3/+3. Only on non-vehicle is just not where we want to be. And seeing the Death Trooper does kind of suck because the card is incredibly strong and I'd love to be playing it in my deck, but I just take the Star Viper, which I think as a card is just fine. You typically aren't going to be getting its restore effect in Boba because Boba's ability gets you back resources. And when you have extra resources, you're going to be taking more actions, which means you're going to have the initiative less and less. So, like with Boba, if you want the initiative, you're going to be pretty aggressive about it and sort of turn off his ability. So, it's typically just a 3 resource, 3/3 in space, which I think is fine because one of the biggest issues that decks run into is their inability to deal with A-Wings. So, I'm happy to have it, just not excited for a second pick. I think in set one, you really need to be thinking about how do you deal with A-Wings and how do you deal with Bobas. Like, you really need to make sure that you have 2, 3, and 4 resource units so you can trade into Boba. And you need to make sure you have units in space so that you can contest the sky against an A-Wing. Okay, here is an interesting pick. It's between, in my mind right now, between Strike True and ATST. But ATST is just so strong, and I think Strike Through is just fine. It requires you to have units, which isn't very difficult for Boba, but I think I'd rather have something with Overwhelm that can just contest the board. And also ATST is an Imperial unit, which cares a lot for maximum firepower. I actually don't remember what I ended up taking here, if it's Lizard. I think I'm thinking about, do I want to be paying 7 for a removal spell? And looking at my curve, I think I just quickly come to the conclusion that the answer is no. Like, hypothetically, the strength of Boba and playing resupplies in ramp is that I'm going to be playing units above curve. So I'm just like, let me take the unit that gives me Sentinel and allows me to make the decisions with what I want to trade and ambush with. So I don't actually think you want to, because typically you'd be happy to play a 7 resource destroy a non-leader unit, but I don't think we want that in this particular situation. Now we see Bodhi Rook and Bounty Hunter crew, and this isn't particularly close. Unless we were mono yellow, it might be a little closer, but Bounty Hunter unit, or the 6 drop 4/4 with ambush is just so strong because it gets you back a event. Even if I don't have a ton now, it's likely that I'll get some later, so I'm happy to sort of draft around this the same way I'm drafting around maximum firepower. See another A-Wing, which is just heartbreaking. And now we have an interesting decision between our third lackeys, our first mercenary company, and our 3 drop. This is actually, in my mind, I think that I should be taking the 7th Fleet Defender. The reason why I don't end up doing this is I think that the player 3 to my left isn't actually Boba, and I end up taking a mercenary company. So I'm planning on having this wheel. That's my mindset. I know it's an extremely greedy pick considering we'd love another 3 drop, but I think the strength of the mercenary company is just so high, and I'm personally a very greedy drafter. So in my mind, I'm going, okay, I have a good read on the table. I am going to be wheeling this card, and I'm going to take the greedier pick. I think it's a little bit easier to be greedy in Star Wars Unlimited simply because the constraints on resources are so difficult, especially for double aspect units and events. So that's my logic, but who knows if we'll get it back or not. Either way, can't complain about a mercenary company. This is basically a non-pick. I don't want to play any of these cards. I'm looking to see if I have any low drop units, which I do have some that have ambush. The issue is that like I don't want to have negative tempo in this deck, but also don't need another 4 resource 3/5. So I take it just in case I need to board it in against some A-Wings. And that's the only reason. Here it's between a third lackeys and a shoot first. The reason why I would take shoot first over lackeys here is because shoot first is essentially free with Boba Fett. If you have the initiative, you simply pay 1, kill one of their units with yours, untap that resource, unexhaust that resource with Boba Fett, and it becomes a free removal spell, so it allows you to be a little bit more aggressive with taking the initiative. And even though I think probably, even in a vacuum, a third Syndicate lackeys is probably better than your first shoot first, I think specifically in Boba Fett, this card finds a ton of strength because of that. Especially since a lot of units just trade in this game, and this allows you to get a free 1-for-1. There's actual nothing in this pack, so I take Snapshot Reflexes. I'm hoping to never play this card, but if I do, it's not the end of the world. Getting a little bit of free action economy for one resource is not terrible. Another thing you might notice me doing is putting the tokens in between, and that's just to hide my picks when I'm drafting. But that's the only reason. I don't think there's much of a pick here. Simply not to hate draft, I take this because I think it's that bad to hate draft. I'd rather take a one resource unit that I'll likely never play over a 5 resource unit that I'll know I will never play. And because we have resupply, we're picking between Greedo and the Trooper. I end up taking the Trooper because I think it has upside better in the late game. And I know it's weird because I was talking about I took the 6 drop that returns an event to your hand. I want to be drafting more events, which lead me want to play the Greedo, but I think the upside on the 2 drop is just too high. Here we take an 8/8, which is going to be the absolute top of our curve, and I think this card is fine, not great, but in general, in this format, something to think about is that the games are typically going to be going later, so not the end of the world to be playing a 8 drop. Now, in this pack, we're really hoping to get one more resupply or another of the 3 drop 2/1 that turns into resupply. I forget the name of the card, but anything ramp, we're going to prioritize as high as we can, and then 2 and 3 drops we're also going to prioritize super highly. The strength of being able to get Boba out early is just super high, and if we can get more of those effects, we're going to snap them up. Okay. Here we end up between, I had no choice, Viper Probe and the 4 drop 4 with Ambush if you control a green, but I think I'm going to quickly look and see that my early units are typically going to be Villainous and yellow, not a ton in green. And also, I think we just want 2 drops to be able to trade, especially ones that give us info into what's going on in our opponent's strategy by looking at their hand. Another thing to consider is that it also works with maximum firepower. So that's not nothing. That's something I'm also considering here. And like the top of my deck is so strong that I think we just need something early. Also, I think I had no choice to probably just wheel. Again, I don't think anyone's in yellow villainous, which is crazy considering most pods can support 2 Bobas. The real issue is when 3 Bobas get drafted, then things can get a little sticky, but I don't think that's the case on this table. I actually think I might have been the only Boba drafter, which is crazy. So, don't need another 7 drop. Just looking at our curve one more time. I like just to be very sure, but we have enough top end. Also, something to consider is that your 2 resource units are extremely good in Boba because when he flips and completes an attack, if you defeat an enemy unit or if one has left the battlefield, you basically get to play a 2 resource unit for free, which is just can be backbreaking, especially if it's the ones that have upside later in the game, like this trooper right here. See another ATST, another 7th Fleet Defender, and this pack is stacked. I think really for me it's between the 2 top end cards, but at the end of the day, I think 97th Legion is just too strong. I actually think the card is insane, especially if you're able to ramp to it. Which I'm thinking green is open, so we'll be getting perhaps another resupply. Although 7th Fleet Defender is also extremely strong. It also takes out 2 A-Wings, which we've passed a ton of. But I'm just thinking about like what is the strongest card for our deck. And it's probably just 97th Legion, even though ATST is also as similarly statted for to the 97th Legion. It's just so much harder to deal with. is a tough pick, but I think I'm going to be greedy and take 97th Legion. Now our top end is like unbeatable if we can get to that part of the game. Viper Droid, another walker, and here is Super Laser Tactician. As good as the Refinery Walker is, it's not close. This is probably one of the best cards our deck can pick up. Having another way to ramp is just going to be so difficult when you're playing against Boba. And here we end up between a Shoot First and Snowtrooper Lieutenant, and I'm pretty much always taking Snowtrooper Lieutenant. The reason being is it has pretty much a similar effect and allows one of your low resource units to trade with a higher resource unit, plus it gives you back some action economy. Here we see another Super Laser Tactician. Now our deck is gone from very good to probably unbeatable, nigh us running into, some busted red-green heroic deck in aggro. It's just so difficult to be able to beat Boba when he comes out on 4. And now we see a resupply, and this is probably indicative of something that's gone terribly wrong in the draft. Maybe people don't understand how good this card is, but resupply is honestly probably the best common in the set, especially in Boba. The card's just backbreaking. I don't think this pod maybe doesn't realize it. That's the only thing I could assume. Here, because we drafted around our first maximum firepower with taking the Snowtrooper Lieutenants, the ATST, and the Viper Droids, we could pick up another one pretty safely. And in my mind, our deck is just basically complete. Really, all we could use is maybe a 7th Fleet Defender to contest the A-Wings, which is something that's always in the back of my mind, but I don't know how much any of this is going to matter. With 4 ways to get to 5 resources a turn earlier, I don't think many decks are going to be able to beat turn 4 Boba. Turn 5 Boba is already pretty backbreaking. It's something you need to draft around. Turn 4 Boba, you almost can't deal with. The thing I'm thinking about right here is between the Headhunter, so I can deal with A-Wings, but I don't think it's good enough since it only deals 2 damage on attack and can be eaten by an A-Wing with 1 attack, so I think I had no choice. I doubt I'll need it, but maybe I run into like another ramp deck, which seems pretty unlikely, where I'm going to be needing to play this against big units. It's weird because as a 7-drop and something that gives you back tempo, you want to be playing it against a deck that's or against a board state that's going to be unfavorable for you, where they're going to have a lot more units than you, but it's like too slow for that. It just ends up being in a weird spot. Here I just take Ruthless Raider because I don't have enough events to turn on ISB Agent. He's actually a dead card in my deck, and Ruthless Raider is extremely strong. And this is what I thought would happen in the last pack, is we would wield the 7th Fleet Defender, so we actually do in this pack, so pretty lucky. End up taking that, and now our deck is just a straight A+, missing Overwhelming Barrage, but we have Overwhelming Barrage at home. We have maximum firepower, so not the end of the world. Although it would be nice to get the Cartel Space, whatever. That card is pretty good in a tempo deck, and I think with being able to guarantee Boba on 4, we're going to have pretty big tempo advantages against our opponents. These are all non-picks here. We have more than 30 playables, so nothing worth considering here. Just getting towards the end of the draft. I'll take the hypothetical playable versus the card that's never making it into our deck. And that is the end of the draft. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you watching. test, 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 test.